to the next panel, and I just want to acknowledge everyone to start with, in this room, and who are joining us. How many? 2,000 people? Acknowledge every one of you, for the hard work, commitment we're bringing in to make lives of workers better, especially migrant workers. It means a lot. I come from India. I'm traveling all the way. I don't live here, but I've had the fortune of being here with all of you in person and not being online. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you, the Institute, for having me here. In human rights due diligence, we say one size doesn't fit all. So right now, England is going through a heat wave, 25, 30 degrees. 2 weeks back, I was in India, 45 to 50 degrees weather. I was working with some farmers and workers, very hot. It's a heat wave here, so I'm cooling off here, actually, in England. I'm having a good time. But it's very hot for people who live here, and that's the lived reality, right? We see things differently in different parts of the world, and there's a need for us to mutually come together and learn from each other, and that's why we're here today. Also, I would like to share that I belong to a community known as the Sikh community. Maybe some of you know about it. We are from northern part of India. A lot of us have migrated across the world. We are a very small community. The turban we wear on our head, it's a lot of cloth, around 6.5 meters I'm wearing right now. It represents equality, it represents dignity, it represents respect for every individual on this planet. And that includes the environment as well. And that's what we stand for. So we've contributed to the nation of India and also to Great Britain. But we are still migrants, and you will find a lot of us working in Europe, in some of the farms there, in North America, and some of them also have very tough conditions. Just want to take a hand raise. I know some of you are online, but how many have traveled outside London to be here? Can you raise your hand? Thank you. Thank you for being here. Most of you. I have come from Birmingham. My family lives there. I've just come from there, and so thank you for being here and taking that effort. It's very, very expensive to travel by train in Great Britain now, is what I'm observing. And migrants also, I would like to touch upon something about India and then give it to our lovely distinguished panelists. India is a very interesting country right now, very high growth, and economy is doing very well. It's the supply chain hub of the world. The fortunes have changed, for us in India. And if some of you have not visited India, I invite you, please come. This is the time. This is the time to be here. Although we have a lot of problems also with the growth, and there's a lot of work which needs to be done. Indian migration inside the country is very different. It is very local migration, and that's why we say one size doesn't fit all. Migration in some countries is international migration. In India, it happens from state to state. It's a very different situation in our country when it links to migrant workers. So I invite you to come to India to experience that. Some of your companies are actually working in India. So anybody from Indian origin here? Anybody? Indian origin, coming from India? Thank you. I see some friends in the group. Thank you for being here. So let's get started. We have some distinguished panelists here who have done some wonderful work in the area of migrant workers. So I'm going to start with Aarti Kapoor first. And Aarti, if you could just explain about your organization. Very happy to meet you in person. We've spoken so many times online. What do you do, and what are the challenges you're seeing on the ground and some of the approaches you've used in the areas of responsible recruitment?
Yeah. Thank you, Rishi. Just to follow on from one thing you said, you talked about the Sikhs moving around the world. I'm not a Sikh, but I'm a Punjabi, and I'm a product of international migration of the Punjabis all over the world in the UK. So yes, very proud of that heritage and proud to be British as well. So in terms of Embode, we do work across Asia, South Asia and Southeast Asia, and of course migration across Asia is incredibly diverse. We have inter-country, cross-border migration into Thailand and Malaysia, which of course we've talked about a lot, but also, like you said, interstate, inter-regional, intra-state in India, Indonesia, very populous countries. And of course, migration looks very different. When you have foreign employment, whether documented or undocumented, it's still organized in some way or another. It requires having a passport, needing people to get across borders, and that, of course, brings its own vulnerabilities. When you have inter-country or intra-country migration, there's lots of other reasons for migration in big countries like India or Indonesia. There's different cultures, different languages being spoken across regions, and people migrate for crisis reasons as well, crisis-related reasons. They can get into debt, they might be escaping from a domestic violence situation, it could be climate-related, and often with intra-country migration, there is a lot of informal labor where people are not registered. They don't have proper working contracts. They're not registered with social security. If they take their children with them, they're out of school. So some of the work that we do with Embode, one of the main flagship projects we have with AIM Progress is the Ganapati Initiative. The Ganapati Initiative works in Thailand and Malaysia for now, directly with supply chain actors, particularly tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 suppliers. And here we work directly with suppliers through direct consultation, collaboration, because, responsible recruitment is, of course, not just about recruitment. It's the whole trajectory of labor conditions. And so companies need support in raising labor conditions for foreign workers. I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You bring in an important aspect about undocumented workers, right?
Yeah.
People who are not visible. So mostly we speak about people, those who are visible. So that's interesting. We'll come back to you on some of the other solutions you have done. But Cindy, over to you. So great to meet you again. I think we have met after more than a decade.
Long.
Yes, and your organization is very unique in its way. It works with buyers, it works with the unions, worker unions, etc. Please share some of the engagements you're having through Electronics Watch, and what kind of trends you're seeing out there.
Great, well thank you. Firstly, just to say it's lovely to be with friends and people I haven't seen for a long time. Thank you for inviting me. I'm working, as you say, with Electronics Watch as Director of Impact and Innovation. As you say, the organization is fairly unique. I haven't come across any similar organization that works with public procurement bodies, with public buyers, who are using taxpayers' money to buy goods and services, have huge leverage, are buying in vast quantities. And it's an untapped resource of use of leverage to drive change in their supply chains. We also work with worker organizations in production countries, so they are monitoring working conditions, usually outside of the factory gates, so we don't do audits, but building relationships with workers and building trust with workers outside of the factory gates, we start to get a really clear picture of what's genuinely going on. And in that process of working with public buyers to make sure that their contracts and their tendering processes build in the right kinds of requisite responsibilities of their suppliers, and by getting them to share details of the factories and the products that they are buying, we can then trace the subject matter of the contract to the specific workers that are impacted by the company's operations. And so when we discover that there are rights violations, and sadly that is all too frequent, and not news to any of us in this room, then we take action. We engage with industry, we engage with public buyers, use their collective leverage to start driving change. And in the area of responsible recruitment, and those of you who I've known for a long time, I've been involved and engaged on this issue for a really long time. And there are some cases that one experiences and comes across of change that are always inspiring and important, but also tragic in how long they take to address. So in one case, in Thailand, in an electronics factory, Electronics Watch got involved in grievance cases, discovered that migrant workers had been paying huge recruitment fees. They were coming from Nepal, from Indonesia, from Myanmar, a number of countries. And these are workers that were being paid, $8 or $9 a day for a 9-hour shift, and they were paying thousands in recruitment fees. So after a very long struggle with our partner, the Migrant Rights Network, MWRN, which Sumitha is well aware of, we worked to get their recruitment fees repaid. So 10,500 workers were repaid their recruitment fees in full. But it did take 3 years of engaging with industry, engaging with the RBA, with whom we have a memorandum, a terms of engagement agreement. And there is now a stronger commitment from the company, Calcom, to have systems in place. So I think, as other speakers have said, it's not enough just to have the policies. To actually get remedy for workers takes persistence and perseverance and constant back and forth with reports of, well, our audit didn't find anything, or our audit said everything was fine, and so on. So you pursue, and finally there was remedy. So that's just one example.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for sharing that. The gold I'm hearing in your sharing is it takes time. You need to be persistent, and things do change, but it just takes time. It takes a lot of effort and the power of buyers, but still a very audit-led system, which still says things are not wrong on the ground, etc. So it just takes that kind of investigation and monitoring which your organization is bringing in. And it's very nice. Is that case study which you're saying available online, which everybody can have a look at?
Yes, it's on our website.
Okay,
yes.
Lovely. So I encourage everyone to look at that case study. Sumitha, over to you. You already spoke about your organization and what you do. But what do really workers want? You're really in touch with migrant workers. What do they really want? And do you think in the past 10 years, with all the remediation we're talking about, has the situation changed? Has there been an impact on the ground, and what are you observing?
Thank you. I think before I start, I just wanted to say that the US TIP report just was released, and Malaysia was elevated to not tier 2. They were in tier 2 watch list, now they're in tier 2. So congratulations to Malaysia and a lot of the other countries that have gone up the tier. But then I think there's a lot of more work in these countries to do, especially on undocumented migrant workers. That's an area still a lot of the countries are lacking. So coming back to the question, I think this hype about remediation, it's very, very intensified in Malaysia, or even in the region, in Asia region. But for the migrant, if they do not pay, they still have that notion that if they do not pay for a work, that means the work is not genuine. They still have that same thinking. If I do not pay, there's something wrong with the job. That means the job is not available, or the job is not genuine. So that mindset has not been changed yet. And secondly, the migrant does not come to the destination country hoping to be repaid. They don't come with that kind of mindset that I'm going to go there and somebody's going to repay me. No, they don't. They just come to the destination country to work and repay their own debts by themselves. So they don't depend on the company to repay them. So what has changed over this 10 years? Actually, nothing much has changed in that sense for migrant workers themselves, because they are not part of the conversation. Even in remediation, if we look at the remediation, the whole process of remediation, and we have interviewed workers who have done remediation, have gone through the process of remediation, and we asked them, so what was their experience like? And they'll tell you they felt a lot of anxiety because they don't know how much or when they were going to pay it, or when or how they were going to pay. They were not part of that conversation of the remediation. Some will just say, I don't know, they just paid and they just put some money into my bank. I do not know anything about it, So they're not even in the conversation. They're not even in the conversation when they're paying for the money. They don't even have the bargaining power when they're paying the money to the agent. And then now we don't even have them in the conversation when we're repaying them. And I think that's something that needs to be changed. The migrant must know the process. They must accept the process. They must understand the process. Then only you can say that you have done a successful remediation process. If you're not done that, then I don't know what it is. So I think there's a lot of remediation going on around the world, especially in the Asian countries, but it's leaving out the very, very important stakeholder, that is the migrant. So if somebody comes and tells, some company comes and says that, oh, I did a perfect remediation, you got to ask back that question, did your worker say that it was a perfect remediation? You are saying, but did your worker say that it was a perfect remediation?
Got that. Very interesting. Have you brought in the right soldiers? Have you engaged them? Is it top down or is it bottom up? All these are conversations I think which are very important. But Cindy, you had a point.
I just wanted to jump in if I could, and could not agree more with Sumitha. I think we have developed recently, after significant consultation, a set of principles, 10 principles that are worker-centered principles for remedy. And they involve critically engaging with workers every step of the way and ensuring that they are not just consulted about the process of remediation, as Sumitha said, but communication throughout the process, but also determining what kind of remedy is appropriate for them and what they want. And the critical element in remedy is very often workers that organize and try to join a trade union or negotiate collectively. They are often the ones that get locked up and excluded from the workplace. And so we've got quite a lot of focus in our remedy principles around the importance of remediating those that are also trying to represent those workers and speak with their voice collectively. So I just wanted to say that.
No, thank you for sharing that. And we observe that quite a lot. Migrant workers obviously come from various parts of the world. Their cultures at play. Sumitha spoke about the mindset at play, and then involving them together. It's quite a complex process. So truly acknowledge that challenge. But Aarti, coming back to you, we talk about UNGPs again. They are pillars. There is this corporate pillar, and then there's the pillar of the government. And you work with both of them in some way. Mm-hmm. But share some insights about how you are engaging with businesses and governments, and what kind of results you're seeing with these engagements.
Sure. Thank you. I just want to also respond to the remediation point very quickly. Remediation is much broader than just the repayment of recruitment fees. And it needs to start with what is the violation that occurred, and then what is the need of the worker or the rights holder. So it has to start with a needs assessment, and that's where it needs to go out from. And, I talked firstly about my own background. My mother worked as a domestic worker for many years in the UK, and most of the other domestic workers in her company working for a local authority were also in some ways migrant workers. And she didn't get paid properly, and this is here in the UK. And I am a lawyer, and she's my mother, and I couldn't convince my own mother to get back what she wasn't paid because she couldn't face the HR department. She just did not want to go through it. So I really agree with your point. But in terms of government, the governments are doing a lot. And if we look at Asia in particular, from India to Thailand to Malaysia, there are different ways in which governments are building and developing. We've seen huge labor reforms and social security reforms in India, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Rishi. And so what businesses need to do is also align with, enable, and strengthen governance. And this is another idea of good governance. And the other thing I find that supply chain businesses need, suppliers of the brands, they need to really have understanding from their buyers about the context in which they're doing business. The context in which they're doing business, there's a different set of regulations and rules about labor migration, some of which say that recruitment fees can be paid to a certain extent, registration is done in a particular way. So how do you integrate, corporate standards with national regulations of Asian countries? Why are we ignoring? I'm not saying all of us here are ignoring, but I think that we need to respect Asian laws and Asian regulations regarding labor migration. It has its own history and it has its own context, and supply chain businesses are increasingly bearing higher costs from their buyers that are requiring to do X, Y, and Z and not finding the funds to do it. So that's just a couple of things.
Thank you, Aarti. Thank you for sharing that. Cindy and Sumitha, anything from your point of view on government action and engaging with government? Maybe Sumitha, you can go. Cindy, you can go first, and Sumitha.
Yeah, I do think governments are getting to grips with this, and there are regulations in place. I guess having been in government myself for 10 years, having seen government action across the piece, I think we need to recognize that there is a fierce competition between countries as well for investment and for jobs. And so as much as we applaud and need to push for stronger regulation, the enforcement, the political will for enforcement is absolutely absent in most places, including, I would say, in this country. There are some very good legislation in place, but it's all on the basis of nudge. I've written an article about it, actually. We're going to create these laws, regulations, but it would be very nice if you'd, comply, and we'll, encourage you to do the right thing. But honestly, there are no resources for enforcement, for monitoring, for follow-up, and we have to focus on that. Similarly, I think it's not an accident that companies go to places where they know that there is a lack of enforcement of the regulations. I'm doing some research in a new sector that I know absolutely nothing about, in the med tech sector, and I started scrolling through different company websites, and they said, you could source med tech from Europe or the US, but it's much cheaper to go to Asia. It's so much cheaper because labor costs are so much cheaper. And they're blatant about the kind of the trade-offs, and we mustn't delude ourselves that one country in Asia is also playing off another country for attracting investment and creating the next industrial zone that is going to exclude labor protection. So I'm not so starry-eyed about government regulations. At the same time, I do think we need to push governments. They need to be more accountable to their citizens and citizens of the world that come to work in their country as migrants. So I do applaud the work Neil, IHRB have been plugging away at this agenda for a long time, and I was there right at the beginning of the DACA principles. But I think, as you say, we have to go beyond and ensure that the follow-up, the enforcement, the resources, the expertise, the recognition of human beings that are moving from one place to another need a whole range of interventions.
Thank you, Cindy. Sumitha?
Yeah, so I think there's two issues that I think governments have not actually moved on as quick as we want to. One is labor mobility. And when I say labor mobility is where the worker still doesn't have the right to move from, to change employer and employment without the consent of the employer. And then this is only for migrant workers. It's not for local workers or anyone else. Migrant workers, when you go to a country of destination, you can't just simply change your work or your employer. And that is a problem, and that is a cause for forced labor. And a lot of workers, if they want to change, they either run away and then they become undocumented, or they will be deported and then they will either face a ban, travel ban from coming back to the country, or they will lose the right to work. So I think that conversation is not happening enough. And the second one is adoption of the employee pay model. Of course, we have a lot of conversations on the employee pay model, but there's something I want to caution everyone in that when the company adopts the employer pay model principle, the employer knows that I have an employer pay model. The agent knows that I have the employer pay model and that I know that I cannot charge recruitment fees, but the migrant doesn't know. So out of norm and practice, the worker will just pay the fees. And why I'm saying this is because we're just helping a company who has the policy in place, but he has workers who have paid the recruitment fee. So the company is asking, like, where did I go wrong? I've got the principle with me. I have adopted the principle. My agent knows that he's not supposed to collect fees, but where did I go wrong? I say, but does your worker know? I don't know. So your worker doesn't know that you have that principle. So how is it going to be implemented? If the person that is the most important stakeholder doesn't know, then of course the policy won't work.
Got that. Thank you. So we will take some questions, and I really don't know how that online thing works, but I'm sure we are in good hands. I'm more used to the open mic system, but thanks to technology that we could do that. We'll open it up. I have one last question, and then we'll open it up for questions, and we'll have enough time. One piece of advice on how to do this, and all three of you are practitioners, a lot of experience in this. We have friends in the room. One piece of advice for companies, how to make this possible, anything from your experience. I'll go one by one from Aarti and then to Singh.
Oh, just one thing. I've got a whole list here. First of all, let's start with the migrant workers, the foreign worker. What does he or she want? I think, I remember talking to some Nepali migrant workers in Malaysia once in a factory, and the company had employer pays principle and had repaid all the workers' fees. And these three young men were sitting there talking to me, and we had a common language, so they could talk to me in Hindi. And they said, Didi, why is the company paying back the fees to us? And I said, don't you want the fees? And he said, yeah, it's wonderful, but could we have some other things as well? And I said, what else would you want? And he said, well, you know what, I'd like to be able to go home more often. I've just got married, and I would like to go home after 2 years. I don't want to wait 3 years. And my accommodation is very unsafe. We keep getting thefts, and I'd like that sorted. And I think when we actually talk to the workers and listen to what they want, they actually have a whole list of things. And those things are, they want clarification on their payslips, they want safe housing, they want to get paid on time, and they want to be, as you said, treated as human beings. Even just communication, relationships, social dialogue at work. And one of the things that could really help workers' well-being and happiness is training and education. Because when they go back home, they want to be able to use any capital that they've saved and start a business or do something with those skills. So that's about really investing in workers. And I would really, really encourage everybody to actually listen more to what the workers want. And it's not just one-dimensional.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to add to that. I was getting reminded of my experience. And when I talk to workers, they say, we want a cheaper internet connection. So right. Because everybody wants to talk home, right? And that's the biggest problem a migrant worker is facing today, because they want to use cheaper internet and maybe have a Wi-Fi connection, but they have to pay for it today. And that's a request which comes to when I talk to workers quite often. Very small request, but it comes. Sumitha?
It's very similar to what Aarti said, is what the migrant wants is the most important thing. You have a happy workforce, I mean, your company will prosper as well. And I can't agree more. The migrants' needs are very simple. It's not extraordinary, it's not something out of the means of the company. But they don't have that conversation with the workers to find out what exactly the worker wants. And I know what Aarti has said is very, 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 very similar to what we also hear. We just want appreciation for our work. They don't ask money in appreciation, they just ask other things like, even a meal as an appreciation. So their needs are very, very simple, and I think that is what the companies need to do. Listen to the migrants, to listen to their workers.
Got that. More listening needed for workers. Cindy, as a last comment?
I completely agree with that. I would say, in addition, I think that the question about what companies should do, I think that obviously putting a worker-centered approach is fundamental, but what do you do tomorrow when you are buying stuff, when you're contracting stuff, is to think about what is your responsibility as a business. Yes, you might, of course, the first step is that you've got the board engaged, you've got your policies in place, your codes of practice, etc. Do not then push responsibility all the way down the supply chain. Own that responsibility. Understand where your leverage is, where your impact lies, and really engage meaningfully with all the stakeholders. This should not be a compliance-driven agenda. It should be one in which, as Sumitha's saying and others, that treating workers with dignity and respect is going to produce better outcomes for everybody. But the process of understanding a business model and the way it operates means that you really need to apportion responsibility all the way along the supply chain. And understand who needs to take responsibility for what. So purchasing practices are fundamental. Those that are buying cannot just squeeze their suppliers, who then squeeze their sub-suppliers, who then squeeze the employers. It's not an accident that those employers are using primarily informal workers, even within a factory, where a tiny proportion are actually on a work contract. They are extremely vulnerable, they are extremely fearful of losing their jobs and desperate for that work. And so we need to start shifting that agenda and look at everybody's responsibility all the way up and down the supply chain.
Got that, Aarti?
Thank you. I just want to make one more point. When we're talking about suppliers and when we're thinking about a worker-centric approach, as you said, Cindy, we also need to think about the undocumented refugee workers. We have quite a few political issues in Asia at the moment, and in Thailand and Malaysia we're seeing a lot of refugees coming in, and they're not formal refugees, but they're coming in from Myanmar, from other countries, and we've had situations we've seen in Thailand where a supplier, was found not to have proper documentation of their Myanmar workers, and instead of trying to comply and get those papers, which you can't, mostly in Myanmar, they found the easiest route was to let go of all their migrant workers from Myanmar, and they employed Thai workers instead. And so sometimes, in order to comply, companies are being pushed to do things which are against the welfare of workers and migrant workers, or at least humans that are trying to find people that are trying to find jobs in disastrous situations. So, thank you.
That's great. These are great points, and I want to leave everyone with 5 thinking points, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. One was a mix of top-down and bottom-up approach. We bring it together. I think that's what the need is. The second we heard about was things change, but it just takes time. And there is a lot needs to be done. So that kind of a thinking point came out. And then it came out about purchasing practices and how do we look at business core practices and processes, which put pressure on suppliers and then on the people. And then it was about looking beyond audits. How do we look at more voices of workers, worker engagement, bringing them, making them part of the whole process. And last was about political will, which I know very less about, but you spoke very well about the political nature of this whole aspect about implementing things. These are thinking points. I'll leave you and give it to the wise hands of leading the question.
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Bonnie Ling, and I have the honorary title of being professional question asker, which really is much easier than you answering the questions. So I also want to say I am a proud migrant worker / human to the UK, and it's a great source of pride that I can be here with all of you, asking you difficult questions. So we have one question, which is asking you for your experience of perhaps engaging with the hospitality sector, and how well do you know they're performing on issues of ethical recruitment? And then we have one that's just coming in about asking for success factors in engaging with suppliers. And if I may, I'm just going to pick up on the question that was left from the previous opening session for Sumitha, which is one audience member wanted to ask you, what is the biggest challenge from your perspective of reaching out to get migrant worker voices?
Got that. Thank you. So I'll just moderate those three questions, and I'll just go for question number 2 first. First was about hospitality. What was the second question again? Sorry. Can you repeat the second question
Success factors.
So key success factors. What can be the success factors of doing this, especially with suppliers? And maybe you can combine that question with the third one about, how do we bring in effective voices of workers, engagement with them? And just I'll open it up to you if you feel like answering. But can I just point to you, Aarti, first?
Sure.
And then go on.
Yeah, wonderful. Through the Ganapati initiative, which we are implementing with AIM Progress members, we are directly working in consulting to supplier businesses in Thailand and Malaysia. And what we find works is not just holding their hand through setting up policies and developing policies, but how to implement those, and actually working in a very tailored way with each supplier. But one thing, Rishi, that you said is it takes time. It's not just corrective actions to fix things like, supplier businesses are machines that are mechanical and you just fix it. They are institutions, some of them huge businesses, some are small in their own right. So to change the internal system of an organization requires training, capacity building, whole system change in a context which has built that business in a different way. So that's an approach that we're using with Ganapati, and we're finding that's quite good. Yes.
Okay, great. Sumitha?
Yeah, so I think in the hospitality sector, I think it's maybe the hotels or something like that.
Yes,
yeah?
Of course.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not sure about the other countries, but in Malaysia, I think we have a lot of undocumented workers and refugee workers in that sector. Don't get me wrong, but there's a reason for it. So we have a large community of refugees in the country, in Malaysia as well, from Myanmar and other countries, numbering now about 189,000. But it's difficult to find jobs, okay? And it's difficult to find jobs where you have to face public. So we see a lot of these refugees working in hospitality sector because, and in the back end as well, in the kitchen, the F&B and things like that, but not facing the public. And that is acceptable in terms of Malaysian context. But the only thing that we try to monitor is that to ensure that the refugee is paid the minimum wage, is working according to the working hours, according to the Employment Act, because the Employment Act in the country does not differentiate between documented worker and undocumented worker. So they still have a redress in the courts when it comes to labor violation. So that's what we see in the hospitality sector. And then in terms of you mentioned about successes?
Key success factors, of doing this, especially with suppliers, and then maybe if you could talk about how do you bring in voices, like the question was about challenges of engaging workers. I'll flip it. I'll just say, how do you make this happen?
Okay, I think the voices of migrant, it's not an easy process. One is to empower the worker. So empowering worker takes time because it comes from community organizing to skills building, to understand, they have to understand that this is the law in the country and this is the violation that you are facing. Only then can we do empowerment. And this is a whole big process that we do each time we come in across community. Some are successful, so we have a lot of migrant leaders in the country, in Malaysia, and one of the things that we make sure is bringing them to the conversations with the government, because the government must hear directly from the migrant representative instead of us. So that's the aim, for them to come into the conversation, come to the table with the government, to put their thoughts, to put their perspective at the table. So that is the important thing about the challenge. But the challenge is there, but it's not impossible. So we have had a lot of success when it comes to bringing the migrant voice or the migrant leader to the government, space.
Got that. Thank you for sharing. Cindy, you played a lot of roles. So although you're with Electronics Watch now, but from your experience, all those experiences, engaging with workers, bringing their voices and developing some key success factors, please could you share some of the things you have experienced?
Great, thank you. I would say one of the critical factors is workers being able to organize and into trade unions or independent worker organizations that might be run by migrant workers, but to be able to collectively engage, negotiate on their own behalf for better terms and conditions, and to have a structured relationship with their employers in which they can raise grievances, get them addressed at the same time, and feel that they are being taken seriously and treated with dignity and respect. Where that exists, and I'm not saying trade unions are perfect everywhere, and I know there's a lot of concern and questions and fear about trade unions, I think we need to build on what is fundamental as a right. Freedom of association, collective bargaining is a fundamental right, and where workers can negotiate on their own behalf collectively and not as individuals, they are in a much stronger position. So I would say success factor number one. And it's not easy, and I'm not saying it's a straightforward thing, but we need to work towards it. The second is a shift from a compliance-driven agenda. We need to start meaningful stakeholder engagement at every step of the way and stop with the kind of top-down, here's my code of conduct, sign it, you're now responsible. Now we're going to shift the responsibility all the way down. It's a flawed system. We know it's a flawed system. When an employer feels that it's in their own interests to treat workers with dignity and respect and is being paid enough for their order to do that, I think we've got a win-win situation. And thirdly, I think success factor, systems, policies, structures, institutions are all critical, and regulations, all critical. But let's not shift this into a technocratic space. Let's recognize that it takes all of us as passionate, engaged people to make change. And in my experience, where you find those, they make change, they make magic. And let's not forget that actually we can't always, the lawyers are sitting poring over the detail, trying to avoid risk, trying to say less than they need to. But it's when people say, you know what, I'm going to do it and ask forgiveness later. I'm not going to ask permission, I'll just ask forgiveness later. And that's what makes change, I think. In my experience, just looking around the room, every one of you are those kind of people.
Thank you, Cindy. No, next round of questions.
We do have questions coming in from different sources, so we try to pack as many as possible. And there's another round.
Can I ask you how many? Like, were there thousands of questions which came in?
Oh,
like,
we do get
sure,
thousands, I'm sure, and a lot that are not being asked. But we have two really good ones. I'm hoping, can we pack it into another round?
Yes.
Okay, so we have two questions that I think it's very relevant to the panel today. So one will involve you looking into the future a bit. One is asking you, has the business environment in Asia, is it more or less challenging? And in the last 10 years, and what do you see to be the likely trend for the next 10? And then there's another one. Okay, keeping in mind the need to respect local laws and regulations, what should be the role for companies and brands and retailers in the global north be? How do we balance these two? So next round, if we can pack another one in, we will.
Great, thank you. Thank you for creating that. We have around 8 minutes left. So panelists, about the future complexities of business environment. Asia, we take it as Asia as one big pack. Asia is a very complicated place. India itself, is a very complicated space where I come from. So we have, these very diverse, complicated, and populous places of the world. A lot of population lives in this part of the world. So future, what do you think about any complexities, any insights you can share?
Could I go first?
Yes.
So just a couple of things. I love that question. I think Asia's a great place to do business, and it's going to continue to be an even better place to do business. So I think that, and people are better off in Asia year on year. We always hear lots of bad news, but actually if you look at the whole of Asia, from central to east, people are earning better. If you compare it to 20 years ago, you see huge reductions in child labor, more children in education, more people in social security. You have better regulations, people are better off. What we want is the most marginalized and those people at the bottom through political and climate-related disasters to be taken care of. And when we talk about government isn't obviously just one monolith, having come from the government sector before myself. We have different ministries, you have different levels, you have federal, state, local government, and that's the same across most of Asia. So when we're talking about remediation, when we're talking about migration, there's different parts of government that we need to talk about. When we're talking about migrant workers in Malaysia, they also need to be protected by their labor attachés in the consulates, right? I'm sure you've worked with many of them, Sumitha. But if we're talking about remediation at local levels in Indonesia and India, we have to be working with local government, education, social services, health services. So we are going in the right direction. It's not all bad news.
Got that. Thank you. And Sumitha, can I pass on that legal question to you? Also you're a lawyer by practice. What do you think? It's a great question that countries should be following their own law, and they should be strengthening that law, and companies should not be running behind, monitoring and implementing local law. How do you see that? And I'm coming from India. I know my own pain, but how do you see that?
I think the issue is that the local laws are not developing in tandem with the fast-moving pace of the business sector and the economy. So we still have laws which are very, sometimes just too old or not enough protection or things like that. So I think that there needs to be a balance. And one of the constant problems that we have in Malaysia is the working hours, because we have a different standard in Western countries, and then we have a different standard in Malaysia, and then there's always this debate as to which standard are we supposed to be following. But we are not breaking any laws because we are following the Malaysian standard, But then we also try to explain to the brands that if you like, especially in overtime, so there's a certain number of overtime that you have to do, but in Malaysia it's higher. You can do a higher amount of overtime. So then there's a pressure on the company to follow the Western or the brand's standard. So we have to have this conversation, and it's in reality, if you try to reduce the overtime, it will upset the workers. The workers want to maximize their work time. So if you try to cut down that work time, it will actually really, really upset the workers, and then there'll be workers who want to leave the company, and so on and so forth. So it's a really delicate balance where the companies sometimes find themselves in, and I think this is where the brands need to be a little bit more, I think, in touch with the laws in the country of origin, in the destination, and see how we could compromise or rather give some sort of leeway to companies to ensure at least they do not flout the local laws.
Got that. I'm sure there are many such examples, and I can think about those as well, where there's a conflict, or sometimes it's not matching to the international requirement, and then there's always a debate: what do we do? Which standard do we follow? And this is I think the practical challenge of doing globalized business, and so some more work needs to be done. But from electronics industry, like now the work you do, Asia is big in electronics industry, and so what are the future trends with workers, etc.? If you could share, we have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that in the electronics sector there is a huge emphasis, obviously, on in Asia, and the expertise is in Asia. Obviously, when it comes to transparency and accountability, I think there are some big questions about how we get a more transparent, accountable sector. Because for workers in the electronics sector, they're subject to all kinds of occupational safety and health issues. Working hours, wages are a big issue. But there is a lot of, competition expectations and sort of trade wars at the moment are meaning that people are trying to shift production and deal with IP issues in countries like Taiwan, where we've got a huge dependence on the semiconductor sector, but massive political questions around those areas. So even as people are recognizing the restrictions on transparency and accountability and are looking to shift production, it doesn't mean that working conditions are going to get better in other places. And so I think we need a nuanced understanding that this is hugely complex. There are networks in the electronics sector, I've discovered. It's networks rather than supply chains. So the leverage points and the influence lies in very, very different places to what we're used to.
Thank you. Thank you. No, such a pleasure hearing all three of you. We have only this much time. I just want to acknowledge all the points you've made. My mind is not a supercomputer, could not capture it, all of them. But what I want to conclude by that is, in our practice, we do a lot of work with suppliers and workers, and sometimes, change doesn't look so grand. And our panelists also alluded, change sometimes very small. It's about hearing somebody and solving somebody's problem on the ground. Change actually is not that grand as we think about it. So can we look at that aspect about change, small things, and makes a big difference in the lives of people at that grassroots level. So I leave you with that thought, and happy to share any thoughts about India. Anybody would like to have a question, happy to talk over lunch or the networking today evening. But thank you so much to all of you and the panelists. Thank you. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.